and a very good day to you. You're watching live from Paris here on France 24. These are our headlines this hour. The US says it's considering new sanctions on Venezuela, a bid to increase pressure on President Nicolas Maduro. He has dismissed the opposition as cowards and addressed the country's military, calling on his supporters to also take to the streets this coming Saturday. 1 billion yen, almost 8 million euros, has been paid to the Tokyo District Court, the bail payment for former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn, who is expected to leave detention any hour now. Ghosn's movements, however, will remain severely restricted as he awaits trial on charges of financial misconduct. And an investigation is underway at a prison here in France after an inmate got his hands on a kitchen knife during a visit from his wife. He went on to stab 2 of the guards. Also coming up this hour in our business update, we'll be looking at how Chinese telecoms giant Huawei is trying to combat suspicions that it could be forced to hand data to the Chinese government. It's opened a cybersecurity lab in Brussels in an effort to prove there's no security risk from its equipment. And in the international newspapers, Kylie Jenner, the youngest of the Kardashian clan, has become the youngest self-made billionaire at just 21 years of age. The United States says it is considering imposing new sanctions on Venezuela in a bid to increase pressure on President Nicolas Maduro, who for his part remains defiant. During a ceremony marking the death of his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, Maduro called the opposition a minority of opportunists and cowards. He called for a rally of his supporters for this Saturday.
We can't respond to provocations, never. They may continue with their ball-like game, with their provocations. But we are here, the country. We are here, the people.
Well, opposition leader Juan Guaido has also called on his supporters to take to the streets on Saturday. He spent Tuesday speaking to trade unions in Venezuela and called on state workers to get ready to strike, to no longer, he said, collaborate with the dictatorship. Well, from Caracas, our reporter Catherine Norris-Trent tells us more about the latest reactions to Guaido's continued push to oust Maduro from power.
Nicolas Maduro did not pull any punches in his speech, where he hit out at what he called a crazed minority who were acting with hatred and bitterness. And he called on his supporters to just ignore them and carry on with their path, as he put it, towards victory. Now, he didn't actually mention Juan Guaido by name, but it was clear who he was referring to. He said that Venezuela was under assault economically, politically, diplomatically, and internally. He also called for his supporters to come out on the streets in what he called an anti-imperialist day this Saturday, the 9th of March, and that coincides with the date that Juan Guaido had already called for his supporters to again come out and protest en masse. So we're looking forward to a very interesting day there. Rival demonstrations taking place in Caracas and across the country. Nicolas Maduro was speaking out there very vehemently on the 6th anniversary of the death of Hugo Chavez, the former Venezuelan president, and his predecessor, his mentor, the man who kick-started the Bolivarian revolution. And Nicolas Maduro is hoping to draw on Hugo Chavez's legacy to garner support around him, because he's not as charismatic as his predecessor Chavez, and he's not as popular, it seems, even among those supporters of the revolution. So he's really trying to use that as a selling point to say he is the successor to Chavez and he's the one who will carry on his legacy.
Now, renewed activity suspected at North Korea's main satellite launch site. Pictures of the long-range rocket site taken just days after the last summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. They suggest that Pyongyang may be rapidly rebuilding the facility. A South Korean news agency and US think tanks say they've analysed the images and have come to that conclusion. Now expected to leave detention any moment, former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn has made his bail payment and is set to leave the detention centre after over 3 months. His movement, however, will remain restricted as he awaits trial on accusations of financial misconduct. That bail could still potentially be revoked if the prosecution files new charges against him.
After a game of legal ping-pong, a victory for Carlos Ghosn's defense team. Shortly after, a Tokyo court unexpectedly granted him bail after more than 3 months in detention, the prosecution swiftly appealed the decision, which a district court rejected shortly after. The district court's decision could pave the way for Ghosn to be released as early as Wednesday, pending the payment of his €7.9 million bail. In a statement, the former executive insisted he is innocent.
I'm extremely grateful for my family and friends who have stood by me throughout this terrible ordeal. I'm also grateful to the NGOs and human rights activists in Japan and around the world who fight for the cause of presumption of innocence and a fair trial. I'm innocent and totally committed to vigorously defending myself in a fair trial against these meritless and unsubstantiated accusations.
Even once he is freed from the Tokyo detention center, Ghosn would essentially remain on house arrest. Under the bail agreement, he is banned from leaving Japan, will be under camera surveillance, and his electronic communications will be limited.
Japan runs a so-called hostage-based criminal justice system, which means that a suspect remains in custody as punishment if he does not confess as the prosecutors see fit. We need to restore the trust of Mr. Ghosn and the international community in our country as soon as possible.
Known as the Razor, his new Japanese attorney has a reputation for winning rare acquittals in a country with a staggering 99% conviction rate. First accused of underreporting his pay at Nissan for years, Carlos Ghosn has been rearrested twice since then, including for misusing his executive powers for personal financial gain. He had twice had his bail request denied since his latest indictment on the 11th of January.
To tell us more, we're joined now on set by Yuka Roya. Yuka, firstly, very rare, is it not, that a court in Japan, notably at that level, would reject a call from the prosecution?
It is indeed rare for a Japanese court, which generally sides with the prosecution, to deny their appeal. The initial decision by itself was a surprise to grant Carlos Ghosn bail because given that the situation hadn't much changed since the court rejected 2 previous bail applications filed by Ghosn's lawyers. Some legal experts have said that this has set a groundbreaking precedent in Japan, where suspects are typically held in custody until they admit to wrongdoing or until trial. Now, that said, there had been some improvement to Japan's notorious so-called hostage-based justice system. According to statistics, about a third of defendants were granted bail in 2017, and that figure was more than doubled, actually, in 10 years. But when it comes to cases handled by the Special Investigation Unit of a district prosecutor's office, that figure is closer to 0, and that's obviously Carlos Ghosn's case falls into that category.
OK, so it's a bit of a surprise there, but, you know, he's expected to be released very soon on bail, and if no new charges filed against him, though, even at that, he still isn't free. I mean, his trial is coming up. How's that likely to be?
No, I mean, he's only going to be freed on bail, and that means that awaiting trial, he will be out of custody, but he will essentially remain on house arrest in a sense because his movement and communications will be severely limited. Now, after winning the court's approval for bail, though, Carlos Ghosn, as we saw in that report, issued a statement thanking friends and activists for fighting for the cause of presumption of innocence and pledged to vigorously defend himself in court against what he calls meritless and unsubstantiated accusations. Now, the start of the trial, though, is expected to be at least 6 months away, so there's still some time. So far, Carlos Ghosn has been charged with 3 counts of financial misconduct. The first 2 are for overhiding about €63 million in total in deferred salary in Nissan's corporate filings. The companies are obliged to disclose such figures in their annual filings. And he did that over 8 years, or he's accused of having done that for over 8 years. The second is that he funneled about 13 million euros dollars of company money to a business run by a Saudi friend who had previously helped him through a personal financial difficulty. Ghosn is charged with what's called breach of trust or abuse of executive powers. Now, the auto tycoon argues, though, that the deferred payment was only hypothetical because it hadn't been paid out, and that the payment to his Saudi friend was for legitimate business purposes. As you said, prosecutors could possibly file new charges against him, and in particular, Japanese media say that they're looking closely at another suspicious payment of about $35 million to an agent in Oman.
OK, so the story far from over as yet. Thanks.
The saga continues.
Indeed for that. OK, well, we're going to move on for now anyway. And two prison guards here in France were stabbed by a man serving a 30-year sentence. The criminal was behind bars for a kidnapping that led to a death, but is said to have been radicalised while in custody. The French government is describing his attack as an act of terrorism.
After a standoff lasting around 10 hours, French police have arrested the man who attacked two prison guards at a high-security facility. The perpetrator coming not from outside the prison, but inside it. Authorities are referring to the incident as a terror attack. According to the Paris prosecutor, the man carried out the stabbings to avenge the perpetrator of last December's attack on the Christmas market in Strasbourg.
The information, along with knowledge about the profile of the individual, who is serving 30 years in prison, justifies an investigation by the anti-terror department of the prosecutor's office. The individual was also convicted for glorifying terrorism in 2015.
On Tuesday morning, 27-year-old Michael Kiolo stabbed two staff members as he was receiving a visit from his spouse in the family visiting unit. Kiolo's wife died from her injuries following the police assault. As for the guards, one of them suffered a serious wound to his chest, while the second was stabbed in the face and back. Both are in stable condition.
I've come to tell the community here at the prison that, like them, I was shocked. And I will, of course, make sure everything is done in order to understand how this situation came about.
The investigation will now focus on how the prisoner's wife was able to bring in a ceramic knife into the facility and why he was not under increased surveillance.
Still on the streets, protesters across Algeria continue their demonstrations and demand that Abdelaziz Bouteflika relinquish his bid for a fifth term in office. The 82-year-old had a stroke in 2013 and hasn't been seen much in public since. He did win a fourth term a year after that, though. This time, locals say enough is enough. They're calling not just for the president to go, but also demanding that the government does more to improve the country's economy. Clement Bonneau has the latest.
No means no. Thousands of students responded to calls on social media, gathering outside Algiers' main post office on Tuesday. Their message is clear. They want President Bouteflika to step down now.
We are tired. The people are tired. Most of us have only known one president. It's time to change things.
We'll continue until things change. It will be peaceful. There will be no violence. Nothing at all.
Abdelaziz Bouteflika confirmed on Sunday he would seek re-election in April, despite widespread protests in the country. However, he vowed to hold a national conference to set a date for early elections, which he said he would not contest. Most Algerians are hardly convinced, and protesters have once again taken to the streets. From Algiers to Iran and across the country, students have been joined by thousands of people, calling for a general strike until their demands are met. The two-week-old standoff, however, looks no closer to being resolved, with authorities vowing to stop Algeria from descending into chaos.
Some people are annoyed that Algeria is now safe and stable. They want Algeria to return to the dark years of civil war, during which the people paid a heavy price.
Abdelaziz Bouteflika has been in power for 20 years. He's rarely been seen in public since suffering a stroke in 2013. His opponents say he's no longer fit to serve. He's currently in a Swiss hospital undergoing what the government describes as routine medical checks.
Meanwhile, the United States has voiced its support for the right of Algerians to protest, saying they're monitoring the situation on the streets, sentiments echoed by the European Union. Now, turning to something very different, and on the windswept prairies of Western Canada, one couple have broken the record for the world's largest snow labyrinth. It is just under 2,800 metres squared. It took the farmers weeks of planning, and they had to bring in 370 truckloads of snow to supplement the powder on their fields. With ice walls that are almost 2 metres high, visitors, as you can see, are greeted by ice sculptures at various corners. If the cold temperatures hold, they did at one point drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius, then this maze could stay open for a few more weeks. Amazing.